The successful TLC reality TV show franchise 90 Day Fiancé documents the lives of Americans who have found love outside of the United States. And even though by the magic of editing, the show wants to make the Americans, especially the men that end up in the show as poor victims, in reality they do come across, the majority of them at least, as obnoxious people with sketchy past who would go to not so wealthy countries hoping to find their significant other. Even though this successful reality TV show is very recent and the use of passport bros has been popularized in the past few years, this phenomenon is not new. Now, let's start with talking about the definition of a passport bro. According to Urban Dictionary, the passport bros are men who have chosen to seek out foreign women, typically from other countries, for relationships. They believe that Western women have been influenced by cultural and societal pressures to behave in a certain way, and that by seeking out foreign women, they can find a more authentic, fulfilling, and harmonious relationship. This is seen as a way to restore the natural balance between masculine and feminine energy and to avoid the wickedness of Western women. Okay. Now, let's talk about the history of this practice. The term passport bros is quite recent, as I mentioned before, and some men have embraced this identity and even formed communities. One can find websites and social media accounts dedicated to this lifestyle. However, the phenomenon of intentionally finding a wife in developing or poorer countries is not new. An example is the well-documented history of white British women moving to colonies such as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, or South Africa to marry white colonists in the half of the 19th century. The mail order bride system, which exists to this day, is both the predecessor of passport bros and another way for certain type of men to achieve the same goal. According to Wikipedia, a mail order bride is a woman who lists herself in catalogs and is selected by a man for marriage. The women come from developing nations, and the men who go to these places looking for a wife or someone to date are often from developed or richer nations. Mail order brides date back to 1614 when the Virginia Company recruited brides to come to the colony of Jamestown. Nowadays, the practice is almost completely online, especially through agencies that work as the bridge between the men and the women they hope to date or have as wives. The service of these agencies are not free, of course. They refer to themselves as international dating agencies, which is an industry that generates millions of dollars every year and for the most part is severely unregulated. There are countless agencies, and a lot of them are very specific depending on which type of girlfriend or which type of wife the men who hire these services will prefer. And these agencies describe the women that are listed in their websites like if they are merchandise. And this like passport bros, online dating agencies, services, and system is not exclusive of Western men looking for non-Western women. Like, for example, in South Korea, there are a lot of Korean men who go to dating agencies to find themselves a Filipina or a Vietnamese wife. So there's also that aspect of how capitalism interacts with the power and expectations these men have. There are two types of passport bros, those who are specifically looking for a wife and those who just go to these countries to date and they like to engage in sex tourism. But that's something that I touch in another episode already. So by definition, passport bros are sexist because they're intentionally looking for the perfect submissive woman who they understand find themselves in vulnerable situations, which in the big scheme of things, that's how dating in a patriarchal society is. But passport bros just take this reality a step further. They see women as objects that are not entitled to agency and whose main objective should be to please and serve them. And when they don't find what they want in their own communities, in their own countries, they just go intentionally to countries that they see as the women will be more traditional, or that they will see themselves in a more like unequal power situation with them. And the thing is, like, passport bros don't hide how they see women at all. If you go to social media, especially Twitter, and look the post under passport bros, like, you will be horrified. Like, I didn't feel comfortable including screenshots of this post because this is not about doxing, this is not about that, this is about having a discussion. But also because I just had a headache. Like, I had a headache while reading them. It was too much. And there are even like official websites for this community, including the official passportbros.com. And their definition of what is a passport bro is, well, quite self aware to say the least. So, according to their website, they say this: Passport bros express concern about what they consider to be a celebration of sexually explicit and provocative behavior in modern Western hookup culture. Yikes. Because they see women as property as it is, they just take it a step further, as I explained it before. Like, sexism is not independent from imperialism, colonialism, and white supremacy, and the passport bros universe is not the exception. On the contrary, they thrive because of these systems. These systems aid their search for the perfect subservient woman. Passport bros rely on not only sexism, but they also rely on racist stereotypes and capitalism to navigate the international dating world. So during my investigation, I came across this website with a list of the best countries to find a wife. And the way they describe the women from these countries, like, they just describe them like there's things that you're purchasing. Like, the countries in the list, and this like are countries that you will see in a lot of these international dating websites, and they are considered some of the most popular websites, are Poland, Japan, the Philippines, India, China, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, Italy, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Ukraine, and Vietnam. When describing these countries, the list included racist and sexist stereotypes of each country and region, like describing East Asian women as quiet and docile, Dominican women as exotic and passionate in bed, Indian women as subservient, traditional, and passionate, etc. When explaining why these countries would be perfect to find a wife, the reasons this website and other websites gave were almost the same: traditional values and gender roles, respectful, care oriented, docile, and less likely to be feminist. It is not a coincidence that the most desirable wives come from former colonies. The way the world is perceived under a colonial hierarchy is to see the colonized and their territories as profits, which are as a result of conquest. Historically, passport bros have taken and do take advantage of the political and economic situation of the countries they go to for finding women. Even when the passport bros are not white, they still come with the white supremacist patriarchal expectations and perspective, especially since they see themselves as coming from wealthy countries in the global north. So, like African American men that come from the US, non white men in general that come from the US, they are not the exception. Now, let's talk about passport bros and Eastern European women. Some of the countries that are popular among passport bros and have always been popular among men looking for wives are Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. They are perceived as the perfect white wives who have not been contaminated by Western feminism. White supremacy is a key part of the expectations that are associated with women who come from Eastern Europe, because in white supremacy, white women are seen as important tools to produce more white babies. And even when the passport bros who come to Ukraine from countries like the US are black, they have not only the patriarchal gaze, but these non-white passport bros come with the same aspirations of whiteness, femininity, and submissiveness from these women. There are countless websites dedicated to Eastern European women, especially Ukrainian women, banking on the idea that they will make perfect white submissive wives because they haven't been corrupted by Western feminism. A disturbing example of how this industry takes advantage of women's vulnerable position because of the political situation in their countries is the fact that the Ukrainian mail order bride business is booming because of the war. In an article by the Huffington Post, it states that international dating agencies claim that there has never been a better time to find a Ukrainian wife due to the high volume of Ukrainian women who have left their country as refugees because of the war. Now let's talk about migration, capitalism, and white feminism. White feminism fails to understand women who see themselves in these circumstances not only because of how womanhood is seen through the lens of white feminism, but also because they often have a very savior relationship with those women. And they also fail to understand that one cannot fight sexism without fighting racism, fighting capitalism, imperialism, and also without fighting colonialism. I think white women, especially white women who come from the Western global North, don't know or refuse to acknowledge that there is feminism in the global South and in other instances, and that women are capable of organizing and have historically done so, and to this day, they're still organizing. What women who see themselves in this type of marriages need is not to be judged or lectured, but to find a system that will not put them in a more vulnerable position. Like, for example, when they come to countries like the US and Sweden, the migration system puts them in a more vulnerable position and gives more power to these passport bros who bring them. And these passport bros do know how much power their passports holds, hence the term passport bros to describe themselves. Like, for example, in Sweden, when a foreigner marries a Swede, there's the 2 year rule, which means that they need to be married for at least 2 years in order to get the permanent residence permit. There has been cases of migrant women who were about to be deported after being victims of domestic violence because they needed to stay with their husbands for a certain amount of time before getting permanent residence permit. Also, nowadays, on top of everything, you need to speak the language in order to have a permanent residence permit. And for a lot of important paperwork, you need your Swedish spouse to do them for you. And because of how the migration laws are set up, Swedish men get a lot of power over their foreign wives. Just a quick note, in my Patreon, I will talk in more details about Swedish passport bros, including I will discuss some very famous cases and I will translate some news items from Swedish to English. So go check it out in my Patreon. So let's continue. So we can theorize forever about how to stop women from being in this situation. But in the meantime, what about helping those who are already in that situation by fighting the system that puts them in more danger? When they come to countries like Sweden, Germany, and the US, the migration system punishes them. And I know there are helplines in Sweden for women and they do offer services in several languages, but why would they call if they know there's a risk that they will get deported? Since they might lose their current migration status if they report their Swedish husbands to the police. And let me tell you something, even though the current Swedish government is far right with everything that implies, a lot of the policies didn't start with the current government. A lot of these policies were implemented under the super feminist Social Democrats government. Since the very first moment the first imperial superpower was created, passport bros have existed in one way or another. Nowadays, they can be easily found on social media embracing this identity, but also passport bros have met a lot of criticism, and women who criticize them are called jealous and haters. Something I noticed passport bros do is they try to antagonize foreign women with the local women by comparing them to each other, and it might look like they're putting the first in a pedestal, but it's just a very dangerous trap for both groups of women involved. The most important part in this discussion is to build bridges of understanding and come from a place of solidarity when analyzing this phenomenon. And of course, I'm rooting for the women who meet these passport bros. And I hope they are smarter than them, if you know what I mean. Hello, thank you so much for watching and listening. And about the topic of sex tourism, passport bros, and how some of them take advantage of children in countries like mine, the Dominican Republic. A while ago, I did an episode about that topic, so go check it out. And I also did an episode about white feminism, where I talk more about how white feminism hurts migrant women. All of these episodes, you can find them here on YouTube and on all of my podcast platforms. Subscribe, comment, and share. I'm also on Instagram, TikTok, and most podcast platforms, as I mentioned before. Also, check my Patreon, where I have a lot of exclusive content. In my Patreon, you can also find an opinion piece I wrote for the Finnish magazine Astra called Why I Am Scared of White Feminism. And also, as I mentioned before in this episode, I have an extra podcast episode where I talk more about Swedish passport bros, government current policies, and more extra commentary. If you want me to do an episode about these and other topics, let me know in my Patreon, and also let me know here in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time. And of course, this is Mango Podcast.